She pointed at me like I was some kind of criminal, her voice shrill, her face twisted in rage. And then she said it, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You don't belong here." I stood there in silence, holding my grocery bags, my keys still in my hand, stunned. Not because of what she said, but because of where she said it. My house. The house I bought. With my money. That she had moved into just 2 months ago. Uninvited. You ever feel that moment when someone pushes you so far you just stop caring about being the bigger person? Yeah, that was me. Right then. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was a declaration, a very loud, very public way of telling me that in her mind I was less than her, less than family, less than the man who once welcomed her into this home, my home, out of nothing but generosity. This is a story about ownership, about boundaries, about entitlement taken to the next level. It's about what happens when people walk into your life and your house, thinking they have a right to rewrite the rules. And it's about what happens when you decide to stop playing nice and start playing smart. Welcome to Judgy Tales, where real stories meet real justice, and we don't sugarcoat the drama. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive deep into the messiest, most outrageous real-life conflicts. Family betrayals, relationship chaos, workplace backstabbing, and we don't just tell the story. We judge it. Together. In this episode, you're about to hear how a woman married into my family, moved into my home without paying a single bill, and had the audacity to act like I was the intruder. But trust me, it gets worse. She called the police. She turned the whole family against me. She lied about what happened. And then she made one fatal mistake. She forgot whose name was on the deed. So buckle up, because this isn't just a story about a screaming sister-in-law. It's a story about reclaiming space, drawing lines, and the sweet, sweet sound of reality hitting someone real hard. Ear listen. Balance scale judge. Beach balloon share your thoughts. You're watching Judgy Tales, where the drama is raw, the stories are real, and karma. She never misses. I never thought the house I worked so hard to buy would become the battleground for one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. But before we get there, before the yelling, the accusations, the police showing up, I need to tell you how we got to this point. Because this story isn't just about one woman screaming in a driveway. It's about how one entitled person took advantage of my silence, my kindness, and my home. And how my own family let it happen. My name is Marcus. I'm 31 years old, single, no kids, and I work in IT. Not the most glamorous setup, I know, but I've always been the kind of person who plays the long game. I don't party much, I don't spend recklessly, and for the last decade, I've been saving every extra penny with one goal in mind. Buying a house. I grew up in a small, cramped apartment with my mom, dad, and my younger brother, Derek. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Our parents worked hard, but between medical bills, job losses, and the usual life punches, buying property was never in the cards for them. So from a young age, I decided I'd be the one to change that cycle. Not for some flashy mansion, not to show off, just to have something solid. Something mine. Derek and I were close as kids, but as we got older our paths split. Where I was quiet and focused, Derek was impulsive and emotional. He dropped out of college after a year, bounced between jobs, and always seemed to find a new crisis to fall into. I helped him out when I could, gave him rides, paid for his phone once when it got cut off, even covered rent for him when he fell behind. But he always made it clear he didn't like being helped. He saw help as pity. And pity made him angry. Still, he was my brother. When I finally bought my house, modest but nice, 2 bedrooms, small backyard, quiet neighborhood, I didn't expect applause. But I thought at least my family would be proud. My mom cried happy tears. My dad, well, he just gave me that nod that said everything. Derek, he said, must be nice to afford that kind of thing. I shrugged it off. That was just Derek. At the time, he was dating a woman named Vanessa. They'd met through mutual friends and had only been together for a few months, but Derek swore she was different. In some ways she was. She was charming, at least on the surface. The kind of woman who makes strong eye contact, laughs a little too loudly, and always has a story to tell that somehow centers around her. I didn't dislike her at first, But something about her felt performative, like she was always auditioning for something. They moved fast. Too fast. Within 5 months they were engaged. And within 8 they were married. I didn't go to the wedding. Not because I didn't support them, but because it was a courthouse wedding last minute, and I was out of state for work. I sent a gift, called him after, tried to be supportive. But from that moment on, something changed. Vanessa started inserting herself into every family conversation. She'd speak for Derek, make decisions for him, and act like she'd been part of the family forever. It was jarring. A few weeks after the wedding, Derek called me. He sounded frustrated, tired. Their lease had fallen through, and they were in between places. He asked if they could crash at my place, just for a few weeks, while they looked for a new apartment. Now listen, I knew better. I did. But this was my brother. And when family asks for help, you help, right? So I said yes. I let them stay. First, it wasn't terrible. Vanessa tried to be sweet. She offered to cook, though she never did, said she'd clean, also never happened, and made a big show of saying, "Thank you for letting us stay here." But within days, I noticed things shifting. They started leaving dishes in the sink, taking over the living room, inviting people over without asking. Vanessa would use my car without permission. She even borrowed my wireless speaker and forgot where she put it. The worst part. She began acting like the house was hers. She would comment on my decor, critique the color of the walls, say things like, "When we get a place like this," but in a tone that implied this was already part of her domain. I bit my tongue. For weeks. Then I overheard something that stopped me cold. Vanessa was on the phone and she said, clear as day, "Yeah, we're staying at Derek's brother's place. But honestly, it feels more like our house now." A house. That same week, I came home late from work to find a couple I didn't know sitting on my couch. Vanessa had invited them over. There was wine on my counter, food I didn't recognize in my fridge, and my favorite blanket on the floor. When I confronted her, she rolled her eyes and said, "You're so uptight. You live alone, don't you want some company around here?" I told Derek it was time they found their own place. He mumbled something about money being tight, and promised it wouldn't be much longer. That was 2 weeks before the explosion. Because on that day I came home from work, grocery bags in hand, and Vanessa was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, face cold, and before I could say anything, she screamed those 5 unforgettable words. "You don't belong here." She screamed it like she believed it. Like I was the outsider. Like she'd planted her flag, claimed the land. And now I was just some squatter getting in the way. What happened next would involve cops, shouting, stunned neighbors, and a long overdue reminder of who actually owned that house. But before all that, I remember standing there, just frozen. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood the truth. They were never just staying for a while. They were settling in. And if I didn't do something soon, I was about to lose more than just my space. I was about to lose control of my own home. That's when I knew. It was time to act. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. It came in little cracks. Cracks in the way Vanessa stopped knocking on my bedroom door. Cracks in how my kitchen suddenly became her space. Cracks in how Derek, my own brother, barely looked me in the eye anymore. Like he was embarrassed. Or worse, like he'd chosen a side and it wasn't mine. First I tried to ignore the signs. I told myself I was overreacting. That it was temporary. That maybe I was being too territorial, too sensitive about sharing space. But the thing is, this wasn't just any space. It was my home. My name on the mortgage. My name on the deed. My money in every wall, every appliance, every nail. And yet, with each passing week, I felt more and more like a guest in my own house. Started small. Vanessa would rearrange the living room. She moved the coffee table, swapped out my throw pillows, and put up some ugly art she bought from a thrift store to brighten the mood. I came home one day to find my old framed movie posters in a box and a scented candle display in their place. When I asked about it, she smiled and said, "Don't worry, I saved them." But this just feels more adult, don't you think? Adult. As if my taste was childish. As if she was the one curating our space. But I didn't say anything. I swallowed it. Then she started having people over. Not friends of mine. Not people she even warned me about. I'd come home from work and there'd be some woman in my kitchen chopping vegetables. Or a guy lounging on my couch playing with a remote like he owned the place. No introductions. No explanations. Just, oh, this is Bethany. She's just hanging out, or, oh, Kyle's cool, he's practically family. One night, I walked into my own living room and found a small group gathered for game night, drinking wine out of my glasses, laughing loudly like they lived there. I wasn't even invited. I sat in my room, seething, listening to the sound of my privacy being erased. I finally confronted Derek. I pulled him aside and said, "Man, this isn't working. I let you stay here because you needed help, but it's been over a month, and I'm feeling pushed out of my own place." He didn't meet my eyes. He just muttered, "We're doing our best. It's just temporary." But it wasn't just temporary, because within days, things escalated again. Vanessa started locking the bathroom door for long periods, doing her hair, taking long baths. Not a problem. Until I realized she was using my personal products. My shampoo, my razor, my expensive skincare I kept in a cabinet. It was subtle theft, wrapped in entitlement. Then came the utilities. My electricity bill nearly doubled. The AC was always blasting. Lights on in every room. One time I came home and the oven was left on, with no one even cooking. When I mentioned the spike in bills, Vanessa had the nerve to laugh and say, "Oh, come on, it's not that expensive. You make good money, right?" She didn't offer to contribute. Not a cent. Neither did Derek. And worst of all, they kept pushing my boundaries. Vanessa once walked into my room while I was on a Zoom call for work. She didn't knock. Didn't apologize. Just strolled in to grab a charger she thought was hers. I told her to never do that again. She shrugged and said, "Relax, it's not like I saw anything private." But that was the thing, everything was supposed to be private. It was my house. Then came the mail. She started ordering packages. Lots of them. Booze, clothes, home decor. All arriving in her name, addressed to my address. The front door was stacked with boxes every few days. When I asked where the money was coming from, Derek said, "She's reselling stuff. It's a side hustle." But I knew better. She wasn't selling. She was nesting. Then came the straw that cracked it all wide open. One weekend, I left to visit my parents out of town. Just 2 days. When I came back, something felt off. There was a new rug in the hallway. My coat rack had been moved. The living room furniture was in different positions. But the biggest change. My bedroom door was unlocked. And inside, Vanessa had rearranged my furniture. Not a joke. Not an exaggeration. She'd moved my bed to a different wall, added some of her throw pillows, and hung a mirror. I walked in like I was stepping into someone else's Airbnb. It was my room but redesigned. I asked her what the hell she was doing, and she gave me this look, this icy, dismissive glance, and said, "I thought it could use a refresh." I was stunned. I said, "You went into my private room. You moved my stuff. You invaded my space." She replied, dead serious, "Well, we all live here now. Might as well make it comfortable." That's when I lost it. I told Derek right then and there that they needed to leave. I gave them 1 week to find a new place. I was polite but firm. I reminded them this was never meant to be long-term. That I had let them stay out of kindness, not obligation. That this had gone too far. Derek didn't argue. He just looked tired. But Vanessa smiled. Cold, cruel smile. She said, "Sure. We'll figure it out." But they didn't leave. A week passed. Then 2. When I reminded them again, Vanessa suddenly turned hostile. She claimed I was kicking them out during a housing crisis. That I was ungrateful for everything they'd done to make the house feel alive. She painted herself as the victim. Derek just stood there, arms crossed, silent. Then came the final insult. I came home one afternoon and my key wouldn't work. You read that right. They had changed the lock. I was in shock. First I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I brought the wrong key. Maybe I was holding my old one. But no. It was my key. And it no longer fit the door. I knocked. No answer. Called Derek. He didn't pick up. I called Vanessa. Straight to voicemail. Eventually, I rang the bell until she opened the door. And that's when it happened. That's when she looked me in the eye, standing in the doorway of the home I bought, and screamed, "You don't belong here." My hands were shaking. Not from fear. Not even from anger. Though God knows I had every right to be angry. What I felt in that moment was something more raw, more jarring, disbelief. The kind that hits you so hard it turns silence into noise and makes you question your own memory. Because there she was, Vanessa, standing in my doorway, on my porch, screaming in front of the neighbors like I was some home invader trying to break in. "You don't belong here." The words echoed, venomous and deliberate. Behind her, I could see Derek in the hallway, motionless. He didn't say anything. He didn't even move. He just watched, like a spectator watching a car crash. He was too afraid to stop. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Vanessa, open the door. This is my house." She folded her arms. "Not anymore." And blinked. "What are you talking about?" She stepped forward, blocking the doorway like some unhinged security guard. "You abandoned this place. You left. You weren't living here. You never gave us a written lease. You haven't been here in days. Derek and I have rights now. You're trespassing." I laughed. Not because it was funny but because it was insane. "Are you kidding me? I own this house. You're guests here." "No," she snapped. "You were generous. But you can't just kick us out because you feel like it. You left, we stayed, and now we live here." It was like arguing with a brick wall soaked in gasoline. Every word she threw at me was laced with legal buzzwords she didn't understand, and the kind of entitlement you'd expect from someone who grew up believing consequences were optional. Pulled out my phone. "You need to let me in, or I'm calling the police." She smiled. She actually smiled. And then said, "Go ahead." So I did. 15 minutes later, 2 officers showed up. I explained the situation calmly. I showed them my ID, my mortgage documents, the title. All right there in my email and physical file. They listened, nodded, asked questions, took notes. Then they turned to Vanessa and asked her why she changed the locks. And that's when the real performance began. She burst into tears. Real forced, breathless sobs. She started spinning this narrative about how I was harassing them, how I abandoned the house, how they'd been living there peacefully for weeks, and now I was trying to intimidate them into leaving. The officer asked her if she was on the lease. She said, "There is no lease. We're family." The officer turned to me. "Sir, do you have a lease agreement with them?" I shook my head. No. They were staying temporarily. No rent, no lease. One officer looked at the other, then back at me. "Unfortunately, sir, this is now a civil matter. If they've established residency, even if it's informal, you'll need to go through formal eviction proceedings." I felt like the world had dropped out from under me. Eviction. In my own house. "She changed the locks," I said again. "She locked me out." "We understand," the officer said gently. "And we're not saying she's in the right. But unless there's an immediate threat or danger, we can't forcibly remove someone without a court order." I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood there on the sidewalk, humiliated. The neighbors were watching from their windows, pretending not to watch. Vanessa's crocodile tears had dried, and she leaned smugly against the doorframe, victorious. "You should probably find a place to stay tonight," one of the officers added. "File the paperwork on Monday. It's your best option." So I left. I drove to my parents' place, barely speaking, just moving through the motions like a ghost. My mother was horrified. My dad was furious. But even they didn't fully understand the legal maze I'd been shoved into. They just kept repeating the same question I was asking myself. How did we let it get this far? But here's where the twist comes in. Because while Vanessa was busy decorating my living room with throw pillows and stealing shampoo and playing queen of a castle she didn't own, she forgot one very important detail. I'm not stupid. Don't play games. But I also don't lose. You see, weeks before this all exploded, I had already started documenting things. Had emails, had texts, had screenshots, conversations with Derek where he acknowledged they were just crashing. Messages where Vanessa thanked me for letting them stay temporarily. I had smart security cameras, audio enabled. I had footage of her yelling at me, entering my room without permission, and yes, even discussing changing the locks. But I didn't stop there. 'Cause I also had a lawyer. Not a fancy one. Just a no-nonsense local attorney I'd hired when I bought the house. I called him the next morning, explained everything, and forwarded all the documents. He didn't say much on the phone, just a quiet, "Oh, they screwed up," and told me to come in first thing Monday. When I arrived, he already had a plan. Vanessa and Derek had no lease, no proof of rent payments, no utility accounts in their names, no legal standing. They were, by every definition, guests who had overstayed their welcome, and changing the locks without my consent. That was not only unethical, it was potentially illegal. My lawyer filed an emergency court order for unlawful detainer, and 2 days later I had what I needed. I came back to the house, papers in hand, calm, collected, and with a sheriff's deputy at my side. Vanessa was home alone. When she opened the door and saw me there with an officer, the color drained from her face. She tried to speak, probably to spin another tearful tale, but the deputy wasn't in the mood. He handed her the documents. He read her rights. He explained the situation. She had 48 hours to vacate. No appeal. No loophole. No, we'll figure it out. 48 hours. When Derek came home later that evening, I was standing in the driveway. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I just looked him in the eye and said, "You let her turn this into a war. You could have stopped this. But you didn't." He didn't respond. Not really. Just stood there, stunned, like he finally realized he wasn't the hero in this story. That night, Vanessa posted some dramatic rant on Facebook, accusing me of being heartless, calling me materialistic, even suggesting I was threatened by their love. She painted herself as the underdog. But no one bought it. Not after the truth came out. The next day I changed the locks again. This time legally, with an official order. I had the cameras updated, installed new ones, and made it clear to the neighborhood that if anyone saw her on the property after the deadline, they should call the sheriff. Vanessa moved out exactly 47 hours later. Not because she respected the law, but because deep down she knew she'd lost. Not just the house, but the illusion. The illusion that she could play queen in a kingdom she didn't build. The illusion that manipulation and performance could substitute for respect. And the illusion that silence equals surrender. This wasn't just about property. This was about control. About dignity. About the quiet power of saying, "No more." Once Vanessa and Derek were legally forced to leave my home, I should have felt relief. And for a minute I did. But then the aftermath hit. The house was a disaster. I walked through each room like a crime scene investigator, slowly, carefully, trying to assess the damage. And it wasn't just mess. It was intentional. It was personal. Trash in drawers. Scratches on furniture. A large red wine stain on the beige carpet I had just installed 6 months ago. My guest bathroom had lipstick smeared on the mirror in what I can only assume was a final, petty goodbye. Even my refrigerator had been wiped clean. Every last grocery item gone, including the condiments. It was like they wanted to leave a scar. And you know what? That would have been enough for some people to give up. To let it go. To say, good riddance, and move on. But I wasn't some people. Vanessa had tried to humiliate me, manipulate me, and steal control of something I had worked for years to build. She didn't just cross a line. She treated that line like a joke. And Derek. He stood by her. So no, I wasn't about to let it end with a wine stain and a Facebook rant. You see, I hadn't just taken legal action to evict them. I had also filed a property damage claim. And I had documented everything. Photos, videos, receipts. The sheriff's deputy even wrote a supplemental report noting the condition of the house at the time of their exit. And once I filed the claim, I filed a small claims lawsuit for intentional damage and loss of property. Vanessa's side hustle on Facebook. Selling clothes and home decor. Yeah, I knew the page. I knew the payment platforms she used. And I had proof that she sold items she took from my home. My Bluetooth speaker, my rug, and 2 framed prints from my hallway. This wasn't just about getting even. This was about justice. Real legal, satisfying justice. About 2 weeks later, they were both served. I can't describe the level of joy I felt when I imagined Vanessa opening that envelope. From what I heard through the grapevine, she was livid. She went on a rant. Public, messy, predictable. Called me vindictive, said I was obsessed. And bitter because she found happiness. Found happiness. In my house. I wasn't done. While waiting for the court date, I also made a few quiet phone calls. You see, Derek had recently started working for a friend of mine. Unaware we were connected. It was a contracting gig, and the friend had hired him as a favor, trusting that family meant something. I shared everything with my friend. The police report, the eviction notice, the damages. I didn't ask for anything, but I didn't have to. My friend let him go the next day. And as for Vanessa, well, remember how she bragged about doing freelance work for a boutique PR firm? I contacted the agency, again not to destroy her, but to clarify a few things. Sent them links to her public posts. Her drama-filled rants, her accusations, her colorful comments about using stupid people to get ahead. They quietly ended their contract with her the following week. Actions. Consequences. But the real satisfaction didn't come from seeing them lose gigs or freak out over court summons. It came in the courtroom. The day we faced each other again. Vanessa wore all black. Dramatic, like she was heading to a funeral. Derek didn't even sit next to her. They looked like 2 people sharing a sinking ship, each blaming the other for the hole in the hull. I presented my evidence calmly. I didn't embellish. I didn't exaggerate. I had facts, photos, invoices. The judge didn't need convincing. He ruled in my favor. They were ordered to pay $5,732 in damages, plus court costs, and within 60 days or face collections. I'll never forget the look on Vanessa's face. It wasn't just anger. It was defeat. Because she finally realized that she had tried to play a game in a house she didn't build, with rules she didn't understand, and she lost. But here's the part that really sealed it. About a month after the judgment, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Derek. He said he was sorry. That he didn't expect things to go that far. That he'd lost control. That Vanessa had convinced him it was all about standing up for themselves. And that he had nowhere to go. He asked if I'd help him. Not financially. Just to talk. I thought about it for a long time. But in the end, I replied with one sentence. You made your choices. Now live with them. Because sometimes, the most satisfying revenge isn't about yelling louder or burning bridges. It's about rebuilding. Reclaiming peace. Refusing to be dragged back into the chaos. Today my home is quiet again. Clean. I planted a new garden in the backyard. Something I always wanted to do. I replaced the wine-stained carpet. Hung up new art. Got a smart lock system. And every time I walk through that front door, I take a deep breath and remind myself, this space is mine. My peace. My work. My boundaries. And no one gets to scream me out of it again. There's something surreal about walking back into your own home and feeling like you finally belong. Not just physically but emotionally. Like a long exhale after holding your breath through a storm you didn't sign up for. That's what it felt like the first night I walked through my front door. Alone, lights off, the air still heavy with the echoes of voices that didn't belong. And yet, it was finally mine again. The house didn't feel peaceful yet. Not entirely. Not after everything that happened. The room still held traces of the chaos. Minor scuffs on the wall, a faint smell of that candle Vanessa always lit, empty spaces where furniture had been shifted or stolen. I had won. I had legally, morally, and decisively reclaimed what was mine. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that a part of me had been changed. Not in a dramatic movie ending kind of way, but in the quiet, sobering realization that sometimes the people you think are family stop being that when they see an opportunity to take advantage of your silence. You don't expect betrayal from strangers. You expect it from people who already know the blueprint of your kindness. That's the real lesson. For the longest time, I equated being a good brother with being available, with stepping up when things got messy, with making sacrifices quietly because that's what family does. I was taught, like many of us were, that blood is thicker than water, and that loyalty means biting your tongue for the sake of peace. But what no one tells you is that peace without boundaries isn't peace at all. It's just permission. Permission for others to slowly erode your space, your trust, and your identity in the name of love. I didn't just let Derek and Vanessa stay in my house. I handed them my silence. I gave them the benefit of the doubt again and again, even as the red flags screamed louder with each passing day. Not because I was naive, but because I genuinely believed that if I just stayed calm, if I just gave a little more space, if I just waited it out, they'd remember who I was. They'd respect what I had given. But some people only remember generosity as an invitation to take more. There's a different kind of heartbreak that comes with realizing that your boundaries were invisible to people who should have protected them. And it cuts deeper when those people share your blood. For a while, I asked myself what I could have done differently. Should I have put my foot down sooner? Should I have made them sign a lease? Should I have never let them move in at all? But in the end, I realized that those questions were just distractions. The truth was, I did what I thought was right with the information I had at the time. And that's all any of us can do. The important thing is, I learned from it, grew. And I reclaimed not just my house, but my right to demand respect in the spaces I've built for myself. Vanessa screamed, "You don't belong here." Not because she believed it, but because she needed to believe it. Because if I belonged, then everything she had done, everything she had taken, would be exactly what it was, wrong. And Derek didn't stop her because he didn't want to see the truth. He didn't want to admit that loyalty to someone else had turned him into a bystander to disrespect. And maybe that's the saddest part. He wasn't just my brother. He was supposed to be my partner in the shared struggle of growing up, of becoming men, of learning what responsibility meant. But in the end, when it mattered most, he chose comfort over courage. There's a myth we carry in our culture, especially in families, that forgiveness should be automatic, and that cutting people off is an act of cruelty. But sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and even for them is to say, enough. To walk away. To let people live with the weight of their own choices instead of trying to carry it for them. I didn't scream back when Vanessa screamed at me. I didn't trash talk them online. I didn't throw hands or plot petty revenge. I used the truth. I used the law. And I used my voice. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. So what's the real takeaway from all of this? It's not never help anyone. It's not don't trust your family. Help people. But protect yourself in the process. Set boundaries that are clear. Say no when it's uncomfortable. Don't let guilt override your instincts. And if someone disrespects your space, your energy, or your kindness, they don't deserve access to it anymore. Believe in grace. I believe in second chances. But I also believe in accountability. And what Vanessa and Derek learned, what I hope others hear loud and clear, is that no one, not even family, is entitled to your home, your peace, or your silence. My house is quiet again. Not the empty kind of quiet, but the restful kind. I've repainted the walls, replaced the rug, bought a new sound system. Sometimes I sit on the couch at night, soft music playing, a book in my hand, and I think back to the chaos. Not with anger, not with regret, but with gratitude. Because sometimes the storm isn't here to destroy you. It's here to reveal who's really standing with you when the winds hit. Vanessa screamed, "You don't belong here." But in truth, she never did. If you've made it this far, first of all, thank you. Seriously. Thank you for giving your time, your attention, and your heart to this story. Because this wasn't just about a house. This was about respect, boundaries, and what happens when people confuse kindness for weakness. We've all had moments where someone pushed too far, crossed a line, took advantage. Maybe you let them. Maybe you tried to reason with them. Maybe, like me, you tried to be the bigger person, only to realize that sometimes being the bigger person means standing your ground and saying, no more. If this story made you feel seen, if you've ever had to reclaim something that was yours, your space, your peace, your dignity, then you know that feeling, that fire, that quiet courage it takes to stop apologizing for simply wanting to be treated with basic respect. And if this story reminded you of someone, of a moment, of a time you stayed silent when you should have spoken up, then let this be the reminder that it's never too late to start honoring your voice. At Judgy Tales, we don't just tell stories. We share moments that hit home. Stories that challenge us, that make us think, that stir something in us. Sometimes they shock us. Sometimes they break our hearts. And sometimes, just sometimes, they help us rebuild stronger. Because here on this channel we believe in one simple thing. Listen. Learn. Not in the cruel finger-pointing way, but in the real, honest human way, where we hold space for the messy, the raw, and the truth that so many people are too afraid to say out loud. So, if you found value in this story, if it gave you perspective or maybe even a little closure, here's what I ask. Hit that like button. Not just because it helps the video, but because it tells us you're here, that this resonated, that stories like this matter, that people are listening. Click that subscribe button. Because this is just one of many real-life stories we bring to light. Stories of betrayal, of redemption, of lessons learned the hard way. And if you've ever felt like you were the only one going through it, this channel is your reminder that you are not alone. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell. Because the next story we tell might be the one that finally says what you've been holding inside all this time. Let's build a community where truth is power, where healing comes through honesty, where we judge, not to tear down, but to understand what we'll accept, what we won't tolerate, and what we'll never let slide again. Because at the end of the day, stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're lessons. They're warnings. They're mirrors. So if this story sparks something in you, let it live beyond this video. Share it. Talk about it. And when you do, know this. You belong here. Your voice matters. And we're listening. Until next time, stay sharp, stay kind, and always own your space. Ear listen. Balance scale judge. Beach balloon share your thoughts. This is Judgy Tales. And we'll see you in the next story.